There's a story written over 2,000 years ago, a story of fire, war, and devastation. A story that, according to some, hasn't happened yet. It begins with a prophecy, an ancient warning about nations rising against nations, about armies gathering from the ends of the earth to wage war against Israel. But this isn't just a tale from dusty scriptures. Today, in the real world, Iran threatens, Israel prepares, the West watches, and the lines between politics and prophecy get thinner and thinner. Because for millions, this isn't just geopolitics. It's the fulfillment of an ancient script. And then, there's Christopher Hitchens, a man who spent his life dismantling religion, a fierce atheist, a merciless critic of faith. But when it came to Iran, Hitchens said something that echoed louder than any preacher, rabbi, or imam. I yearn for a confrontation with totalitarianism. The Iranian theocrats seem to want one. If that's what they want, let it come. And I can tell you who will lose. Strange, isn't it? The atheist sounding almost prophetic. Because whether he realized it or not, his words were tapping into something far older, something buried deep in the collective fear of humanity, a collision between ancient prophecy and modern war. This is the story of how belief, politics, and the shadow of apocalypse still control the fate of nations. Welcome to War by Divine Order. It starts in the Book of Ezekiel, chapter 38. A mysterious figure named Gog, from the land of Magog, described as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. He rises from the far north, leading a coalition of nations against Israel. Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, Gomer, Beth Togarmah. Ancient names that many believe point directly to modern nations. Persia is Iran. Gomer and Beth Togarmah, often linked to Turkey. Meshech and Tubal, sometimes traced to regions of modern Russia. For centuries, scholars and believers have argued, is this just poetry? Is it symbolic?
Or is it a military roadmap for the end of days? Some say it's already unfolding. Iran's hostility toward Israel, Russia's growing presence in the Middle East, Turkey's uneasy alliances, a pattern that looks uncomfortably familiar. But here's the unsettling truth. Whether the prophecy is real might not matter, because what matters is that millions believe it is. Belief has power. Belief shapes decisions. Belief moves armies. In churches, in mosques, in war rooms, the shadow of Ezekiel's prophecy still lingers, whispering that war isn't just inevitable, it's divine destiny. Is it really a message from God? Or is it a dangerous story we keep telling ourselves over and over again? Because when enough people believe they're living inside a prophecy, they'll do whatever it takes to make sure it comes true. Iran doesn't just see itself as a nation. It sees itself as a vessel of destiny, a country whose leaders believe they are preparing the world for the return of the Mahdi, the hidden Imam, a messianic figure who, according to Shiite belief, will appear in the final days during a time of global chaos to usher in divine justice. But here's the unsettling part. For some within Iran's leadership, chaos isn't just a threat, it's a tool, a necessary condition for the Mahdi's return. In this theology, conflict with Israel, with the West, isn't just political, it's sacred. This is not mere strategy, it's eschatology, war written into the fabric of the end times. Meanwhile, across the border, Israel lives under a very different yet equally powerful narrative. A nation born from the ashes of the Holocaust, surrounded by enemies since the day of its rebirth. A people whose very identity is woven from survival and scripture. The ancient covenant, the idea of being a chosen people, isn't just a spiritual concept, it's national policy. A constant reminder that survival is not optional. In Israel, military service isn't just duty, it's destiny.
Every conflict, every border, every threat is seen through the lens of an ancient struggle, a tiny nation against the world. And whether leaders admit it or not, the language of prophecy is never far from the surface. Wars like the Six-Day War in 1967 weren't just seen as military victories. For many, they were signs, proof that something or someone was still watching over Israel. But here's the danger. When both sides believe they're playing roles in a divine script, compromise becomes heresy. Peace becomes betrayal. Because how do you negotiate when the other side isn't just your enemy, but an obstacle to prophecy? When Tehran prays for the return of the Mahdi, and Jerusalem lives by the words of ancient covenant, diplomacy becomes something far more fragile and far more terrifying. In this war of narratives, missiles are only part of the arsenal. The real weapon is belief. Christopher Hitchens, a man who spent his life dismantling religion, a firebrand atheist, a ruthless critic of faith, superstition, and anything that smelled of divine authority. And yet, when it came to Iran, something shifted. Listen to his words. "I yearn for a confrontation with totalitarianism. The Iranian theocrats seem to want one. If that's what they want, let it come. And I can tell you who will lose." This wasn't Hitchens debating theology. This was Hitchens declaring war. To him, the Iranian regime wasn't just another government. It was the pure embodiment of tyranny, a totalitarian machine fueled by fanaticism, oppression, and apocalyptic obsession. In his mind, standing against it wasn't optional. It was a moral imperative, a fight for freedom, for reason, for the survival of everything secular civilization stands for. But here's the irony. Strip away the names, the politics, the context. What you're left with sounds hauntingly familiar. A battle between good and evil, light and darkness, righteousness and damnation.
Hitchens, the atheist, speaking in the exact moral binaries that religion has wielded for millennia. Was it conscious? Probably not. But here's the uncomfortable question. Did Hitchens, in his crusade against theocratic tyranny, unknowingly step into the same mythic script he spent his life mocking? Because his language wasn't the language of diplomacy, it wasn't the language of negotiation, it was the language of prophecy, the language of final battles, of lines drawn in the sand between the saved and the damned. Psychologically, maybe it was inevitable. Humans crave narratives. We crave purpose. We crave a fight where the lines are clear, where we are the righteous. And sometimes, even the most rational minds get seduced by the oldest story of all, the story of the righteous few standing against the evil many. In the end, the question isn't whether Hitchens believed in God. It's whether, when staring into the abyss of Iran's theocracy, he accidentally found himself praying to the gods of war. Here's the question that no one really wants to ask, but probably should. Are we just acting out an ancient script? Are these wars, these conflicts, these endless cycles of fear and violence truly about politics, borders, and diplomacy? Or are they about belief? Because here's how prophecy works. You don't have to believe it's real for it to control you. You only need enough people in the right positions of power who do. If a leader believes they're part of a divine timeline, then every decision, every negotiation, every missile becomes something more than strategy. It becomes obedience to destiny. Are prophecies self-fulfilling? When people are convinced the world is destined for war, how long before they start building one? It's not a new question. The Crusades were waged on the belief that God demanded it. Generations marched to Jerusalem, not for gold, but for salvation. During the Cold War, nuclear bunkers were stocked, missiles were armed.
Not just out of fear, but because both sides at different moments were haunted by the apocalyptic certainty that the world had to end. Even now, modern doomsday cults aren't just fringe groups. Sometimes they wear suits. They sit in parliaments. They advise presidents. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We stare into the chaos of existence and we invent stories. Stories to explain, stories to survive, stories to give the unbearable randomness of life the illusion of meaning. And the oldest story of all is the story of the end, the final battle, the righteous versus the wicked, the chosen versus the damned. So is this what we're doing? Playing out a script written thousands of years ago? Not because it's true, but because we're addicted to the idea that it must be? Can geopolitics ever truly be secular when the minds of those in power are shaped by texts, by symbols, by whispers of ancient warnings? Or worse, are we prisoners of stories we don't even realize we're telling? Maybe the war isn't just out there, between nations. Maybe the real war is inside our own heads. So here we are, back to the question that refuses to die. Is this war by divine order, or is it just another chapter in humanity's addiction to apocalypse? A pattern we can't seem to escape, a script written so long ago that even the fiercest atheist, Christopher Hitchens, found himself quoting its rhythm, standing, perhaps unwillingly, shoulder to shoulder with the very prophets, preachers, and zealots he spent his life mocking. Because in the end, whether you believe in prophecy or not, whether you believe in destiny or just dumb luck, it doesn't change the fact that when enough people act like the end is coming, it starts to look like the end really is. So the real question is this: are we the authors of the future, or just prisoners of a story written thousands of years ago? And if you think this story is strange, wait until you hear what's written